I thought being alone in the wilderness would be peaceful. That's what people always say, that nature clears your mind, that silence heals you. What they don't tell you is that silence isn't empty. It's listening. The first time I realized that was deep in the northern woods, miles from the nearest road. I had gone there to hike alone, something I'd done dozens of times before. I knew the rules. Tell someone where you're going. Carry supplies. Respect the forest. I followed every rule. Still, something followed me too. The trail was narrow and overgrown, pine needles thick beneath my boots. The sun filtered through the trees in thin, pale strips, like the forest didn't want to fully reveal itself. After several hours, I reached a clearing where I planned to set up camp. No footprints. No trash. No signs of recent human presence. Perfect isolation. That night, the forest refused to sleep. At first, it was just normal sounds, wind through branches, distant animal calls. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy enough to be human. I froze inside my tent, heart hammering so loud I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. The steps circled my campsite once. Twice. I waited for a voice. A cough. Anything human. Nothing came. After several minutes, the footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could see a shadow through the thin fabric. It was tall. Too tall. And it stood perfectly still. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, there were no tracks. No disturbed leaves. Just my own footprints and the unsettling feeling that I had been examined, measured, and dismissed. I packed up and left immediately. As I walked away, I had the overwhelming urge not to look back. I didn't. I knew if I did, something would be there. The second story happened to a survivalist named Aaron, a man who prided himself on being prepared for anything. He went on a solo expedition into a desert canyon, confident that isolation was nothing more than an inconvenience. On his third night, his radio crackled to life. At first, he thought it was interference. Then he heard breathing. Not static. Not wind. Slow, rhythmic breathing. He spoke into the radio, asking if anyone was there. The breathing stopped. A moment later, his own voice replied. Perfectly. Same tone. Same words. Same pauses. Aaron turned the radio off, hands shaking. He told himself it was stress, dehydration, exhaustion. But every time he turned the radio back on, it spoke to him again. Not repeating words, anticipating them. It answered questions before he asked. It laughed before he told jokes. It said his name softly while he slept. On the fifth night, he woke to find footprints circling his camp. Bare feet. Too many toes. Leading away into the canyon. He left the next morning and never returned to the wilderness again. He still claims the radio sometimes turns on by itself, even with no batteries inside. The third story belongs to me again, years later. I thought my first experience had been a fluke. Curiosity is dangerous like that. It convinces you that surviving once means you're immune. This time, I went deeper. A remote mountain range where cell service vanished hours before the trailhead. The air felt heavier there, like it resisted being breathed. On the second day, I found a cabin. It shouldn't have been there. It wasn't on any map. The wood was old, blackened by age, but the door swung open easily. Inside there was a table, a chair, and a notebook. The notebook was filled with names. Hundreds of them. Each page had a name written over and over again, increasingly frantic, handwriting deteriorating until it became scratches and gouges through the paper. The last name written was mine. I slammed the notebook shut and backed out of the cabin. That's when I realized the forest had gone silent. No birds. No wind. No insects. Something exhaled behind me. I ran. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs nearly gave out. I never saw the cabin again. When I checked satellite maps later, there was nothing where it should have been. The fourth story comes from a park ranger who worked in a vast, protected wilderness area. He told it anonymously, afraid he'd lose his job if he spoke publicly. People went missing there. Not often enough to cause panic, but enough to raise questions. experienced hikers, hunters, solo campers. One night, during a routine patrol, he found a campfire still burning. No one around. Supplies neatly arranged. A pot of water still warm. Then he heard voices. Multiple voices. All calling for help. All coming from different directions. All using the same words, in the same tone. Please help me. I'm lost. He knew better than to follow. He had been trained for situations like this. Still, the voices sounded so desperate, so human. As he stood there, the voices stopped. Then one voice remained, his own, calling his name from the darkness. He left the area immediately and filed a report recommending that section of the park be closed. It wasn't. Budget issues, bureaucracy, disbelief. A year later, another ranger vanished in the same region. The final story is the worst because it doesn't end. A woman named Lena went on a solo wilderness retreat to grieve the loss of her brother. She wanted silence, solitude, space to think. On the first night, she dreamed of someone standing at the edge of her campfire light, watching her. When she woke, there were footprints in the dirt, bare, deep, leading into the trees. Each night after that, the dreams continued. The figure got closer, clearer. It wore her brother's face. During the day, she found signs of someone else being there. A stick moved. Food slightly rearranged. Her name carved into a tree she didn't remember passing. On the final night, she woke to someone sitting across from her by the fire. It looked like her brother. It spoke in his voice. Told her it was lonely. Told her it had waited a long time for her to come. She ran into the darkness screaming. Search teams found her camp weeks later. No sign of Lena. Only a journal. The last entry read, "It knows how to be us now." People like to believe the wilderness is empty, that it's just land and trees and animals. But being alone out there teaches you something terrifying. You are never as alone as you think. And whatever is watching from the dark is very patient. The forest doesn't forget the people who walk into it alone. Long after footsteps fade and campsites grow cold, something remains, memorizing voices, copying faces, learning how to sound human. That is why the wilderness feels heavier the deeper you go, because you are stepping into a place that remembers fear. Every snapped twig, every sudden silence, every feeling of being watched is a warning, not imagination. Those who return carry the forest with them in quiet ways, in dreams, in radios that whisper, in shadows that linger too long. And those who don't return aren't lost. They're simply no longer alone. Even now, when people tell these stories, they lower their voices without realizing it, as if the wilderness itself might be listening. Survivors often say the same thing. The fear didn't come from what they saw, but from what noticed them. The land seemed to shift once it understood they were alone. Paths felt longer, sounds closer, and the dark deeper than it should have been. Time behaved strangely, stretching nights and shrinking days, making it hard to remember how long they had truly been out there. Those who escaped describe a lingering presence that followed them home. Sleep became difficult. Silence felt threatening. Some claimed they could still hear the forest breathing when their rooms were quiet. Others swore their reflections looked unfamiliar, as if something had learned to wear their faces, but hadn't mastered it yet. Search teams and officials often dismiss these accounts as stress or isolation, yet the patterns remain the same across different places and people. The wilderness doesn't chase. It waits. It learns. And when someone steps into its depth-seeking peace, it offers something else entirely, a reminder that some places were never meant to be alone with humans, and some things were never meant to be found. What makes these stories truly frightening is how ordinary they begin. A simple hike, a quiet retreat, a moment of solitude meant to heal or clear the mind. Nothing feels wrong at first until the forest starts responding, matching footsteps, echoing thoughts, reflecting grief back in human shapes. The wilderness doesn't attack openly. It erodes certainty, slowly convincing you that your senses are lying. By the time fear becomes undeniable, it's already too late to trust the path back. And when people vanish, the woods don't scream or leave signs behind. They close in, perfectly still, as if nothing ever happened at all.